Hi there, today we are going to talk about one of the greatest ancient statues ever made. We're going to talk about the statue of Zeus at Olympia. Let's get into it. Phidias was an ancient Greek sculptor considered to be one of the greatest sculptors of the classical period in ancient Greece, rivaled only by his contemporary Polykleitos. The two were so great that they have their own page on Wikipedia. And even though their works are now lost, which is a shame, they are still studied today for their contributions to sculpture. One of Phidias's most famous works was the statue of Zeus at Olympia. The statue is one of 7 ancient world wonders. It was also the largest and most expensive project that he ever worked on, and he spent 4 years creating this massive work. Now, you might say what happened to it? Because, it was one of the ancient world's 7 wonders. Where is it? Why can't I go see it today? So, this is actually pretty funny because, according to Cassius Dio, the Roman emperor in 395 AD, so almost 400 AD, the statue was moved from its location in the Temple of Zeus at Olympia and moved into a church in the nearby town of Constantinople. That's modern-day Istanbul. So the statue got moved there, but then later on it got destroyed when the Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque. So it was actually reused in the mosque construction, which is kind of like recycling, I guess. However, there are no records that any of the remains of this statue exist today. And there are no records of exactly how it was destroyed. But before we get too upset about all that, let's just take a moment and enjoy the fact that we have some surviving ancient descriptions of it, right? Thanks to these ancient descriptions, we have a pretty good idea of what it looked like. So first off, it was huge. Zeus was seated on a throne that was decorated with ivory and gold. And the statue itself was made of ivory and gold and marble. Zeus was holding a victory chariot in his left hand. And in his right hand, he was holding his scepter. At his feet were the remains of lightning bolts. And at the base of the throne, there was a small altar where Zeus would make offerings to other gods. And this statue wasn't just impressive because it was huge. It was also impressive because it was just really well crafted. The way the folds of his robes looked realistic. His face was beautiful, even though it was idealized. But I think the thing that would have been the most impressive to me is the fact that his eyes were inlaid with precious stones, and his throne was adorned with 40 figures. On the back of the throne were 4 winged horses, and those were made out of ivory and gold. And each horse had wings outstretched over a wheel of the chariot. And the wheels themselves were made of solid gold. Just the thought of something like that being created, right? The technology, the skill involved in making such a thing. It's just mind-boggling to me. And the materials used, right? Gold, ivory, marble, these weren't cheap materials. And it took 4 years to make. Obviously they had some funding behind them. So who commissioned the statue and how much did it cost? Well, here's what's really interesting. The origins of the statue are a little bit shady, and there's actually some debate surrounding it. So the statue was commissioned by the people of the region of Elis in Greece. The reason for this is because Zeus was the patron deity of the region, but there's some debate as to why the statue was commissioned. So one story claims that it was made to celebrate the victory at the 708 BCE, and that's the original victory of the Elysian Games. Another story claims that it was made to celebrate a victory against the Spartans. But there's another theory that says that the statue was actually commissioned by King Croesus of Lydia as a dedication to Zeus after defeating the Cimmerians. And that the reason why it was placed in Olympia is because the sculptor, Phidias, was originally from the region of Lydia. But regardless of who commissioned the statue or why, it was definitely a big deal. The statue of Zeus at Olympia was one of 8 monumental cult statues that were created during the Archaic period. So these were gigantic cult statues, right? They were gigantic, and they were made to honor a specific god. Most of these statues were actually never finished because they were so expensive. So the statue of Zeus at Olympia was the only one of the 8 that was actually completed. This means that the statue held an important role in the worship of Zeus at the temple. In fact, it was so important that people would come from all around the ancient Mediterranean to just see it, and it was considered one of the most important sites along the Hellenic route, which was a pilgrimage route for the Greeks. And the statue was believed to have healing powers, just like the Oracle of Delphi. So people would come from all around to seek Zeus's blessing, and sacrifices were made at the foot of the statue. The statue was so popular that it even inspired coins to be minted in its honor. The coins were minted by the kings of the Aetolian League, and they're called tetradrachms. And one side of the coin has the head of Zeus, and the other side shows either Zeus with his scepter or Zeus holding his victory chariot. What's really interesting is the relationship between the Olympic Games and the statue of Zeus at Olympia. You see, in ancient Greece, there were several festivals that were dedicated to Zeus, and these were called the Pan-Hellenic Games. So there was the Pythian Games, which were held every 5 years at Delphi. There were the Nemean Games, which were held every 5 years at Nemea. There were the Isthmian Games, which were held every 3 years at Corinth. And then there were the Olympic Games, which were held every 4 years at Olympia. And the main difference between these games and the Olympics that we have today is that these were religious festivals that honored Zeus. It was only later on that the Olympic Games became a secular event. But anyway, in order to reach the sanctuary at Olympia, pilgrims had to pass through 6 sacred regions, and each region had its own sacred road and its own set of boundary stones called Urmai. This journey to the temple of Zeus at Olympia was considered a once-in-a-lifetime event, and the statue of Zeus was considered to be the end of the journey. And travelers would arrive at the temple carrying gifts for the god, and they would sacrifice and pray in hope that Zeus would grant them safe passage home. And the statue of Zeus at Olympia was not the only treasure of the sanctuary. There were also many other treasures, including the altar of the incense, which was a gift from the king of Lydia, Croesus, as a thank you to Zeus for helping him defeat the Cimmerians. There was also a golden statue of a woman named Altis, and she was a dryad, or a tree spirit. She was the daughter of the river god Alpheus, and she fell in love with Zeus. And Zeus disguised himself as an eagle and came down from Mount Olympus and abducted her. And then he took her to live with him on Mount Olympus. So the statue was believed to have been a gift from Zeus to the people of Elis, and it was considered to be a symbol of the power of Zeus. One of the things that I find most interesting about the statue of Zeus at Olympia is the connection between the Olympics and the ancient Olympic Games. Today, the Olympic Games are a global event that brings people together from all over the world. And it's hard to imagine that the statue of Zeus is no longer standing in the temple of Zeus at Olympia. But it's also hard to imagine that the Olympic Games started out as a religious festival that honored Zeus. Anyway, I could talk about this stuff all day long, but I think I'm gonna stop now. If you want to hear more about the ancient world, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.